don't
Yeah.
forget to do that. So that's on. And you can hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah. How
Okay.
about, are you okay?
Yeah, and sometimes the connection will be funny, and every once in a while your sound will come through and it'll be a little bit garbled. And so if I kind of pause and just say, "Hey, can you say that again?" then I may have you do that.
Sure.
Hopefully it doesn't happen too much.
Yeah.
And if there's anything you get started talking about and you say, "You know what, I want to say that differently," or you just want to back up, or you feel like you want to restate something, then you can do it because we'll do all the editing on the back end. I'll have video recording for, maybe have snippets for use on YouTube or wherever. I don't
Mhm.
entirely know what I'm going to do with the video yet, but might as well capture it while we're here.
Sure. Yeah.
But the audio will be fully editable. And so,
Okay.
which is nice.
Okay.
And
Good to
I
know.
take advantage of that too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All
I
right.
planned on like doing some prep work and it didn't happen. So
No, that's okay, 'cause, I really want this to feel conversational, and I
Mhm.
want it to the way I imagined it is if I actually stopped that airline pilot in the airport and said, "You and I need to just sit down at the bar and talk about our experiences." Like, I would like
Yeah.
to have it kind of feel a little bit
Yeah.
like that. I have
Yeah.
questions, but we may just go off on tangents depending on, where things go.
Sure.
That sound good? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll pause for a second and then we'll start.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to chat with you. And as you know, one of the inspirations of this was me being in an airport and seeing an airline pilot who was female and recognizing that even though we're in completely different fields, we probably had some really parallel experiences. And I think for you in engineering and for me in orthopedic surgery, that is probably the case as well. I'd like to. I know I gave a brief intro of everything you've done and your accolades, but I would love to know just what your upbringing was like, where you grew up, who were your influences as you were growing up, and what led you to go into engineering.
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up right outside of New York City, about 45 minutes north of New York City. Both my parents grew up in Queens. So we were in New York City quite a bit when we were growing up. Um, I am one of four kids, so a pretty big family. It's my brother and then three girls, so a lot of women in my family. I will say I didn't really experience a lot of like negativity towards like science and math as a young girl. I never thought that I couldn't do something because I was a woman. That thought never crossed my mind when I was younger. My father owned Midas muffler shops and
Mhm.
like all over New York State. And in high school and even in college, I would go in cars because I thought that was really fun. um, I was actually really interested in biology and chemistry in high school. So I loved my biology class, particularly like I took AP Bio and I loved my chemistry class. No one in my family is in the science or math, so I was kind of the weird one.
A little bit of a black sheep.
A little bit of a black sheep. And so my mother is a high school teacher. She taught high school economics for about 40 years and was insanely involved in our education. And that was like, there's like literally no way for me to describe how involved she was. Like, she was like very much, yeah, overly involved. Me being interested in science and math, loving calculus and chemistry,
Mhm.
definitely did not follow suit from my siblings. And so she had all these like extracurricular activities that my siblings did, but then like none of that was applicable to me. So so she went in and like talked to my science teachers and asked them, you know, like what can we get her involved with. I did these like after school and weekend kind of like I don't want to like experiences at IBM.
Mhm.
I live near an
Oh,
IBM campus.
cool.
I like worked with Fordham University, which is in the
Mhm.
Bronx, doing environmental research because I was really interested in biology. Um, I was also a super competitive swimmer growing up, and ended up being recruited to college and swimming in college. So I went to college and I was a biological engineer. I had no idea what engineering was, no idea. So my guidance counselor is like, "You're good at math and science. You should probably be an engineer," which is like pretty much how like every engineer becomes an engineer.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I was like, I don't know what that is, but sounds cool. All right. If I can like keep doing what I'm doing and keep doing like math and science, like that sounds fun. Um, so I went and I was pre-med. I actually, it's funny that
Uh-huh.
we're talking is I actually wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. Um, so
Cool.
um, yeah, yeah, I know. Everyone, and the thing is like everyone, that was like the only time that I ever felt like someone said something or I would have difficulty doing it because I was a woman. Like I was like, I want to work with like professional athletes and be an orthopedic surgeon. And they were like, well, they're not gonna let you in the locker rooms because you're a woman and you need to be really strong. And I was like, whatever. So it's it just was, you know, so of course I decided to be a civil engineer, which is like not much better. But I was a biological engineer for 3 years. Took the MCATs, realized I actually
Mhm.
don't really like to study biology. I just like to read about it. And I kind of missed the math in my classes. So I switched to civil engineering. So
Cool.
it's kind of a roundabout path, but
Yeah. Now, some of our listeners may not be as familiar with the different types of engineering, the different sort of subspecialties within engineering. Can
mhm.
you give me like, you know, those idiots guides? So like give me the idiots version of what it is in general an engineer does and also kind of the major broad different types and how they're different.
Sure. I like to say engineering is problem solving. So you're just a
Mhm.
problem solver. It's pretty much what any good undergraduate engineering education is going to give you. And then within civil, we work with all civil infrastructure. So whether that's transportation, that means like how people are getting around, looking at traffic flows, looking at interactions between bicyclists and cars and pedestrians, to you know what they're actually driving on. So like roads, bridges, tunnels, railroads. And then how everything is constructed, looking at there's a whole area of construction engineering. How can we make construction more efficient, more sustainable, looking at different materials, looking at different ways of construction, how automation and robotics are like fitting in with construction, which is a really big topic today. And then you can kind of look at water resources, how water is flowing, what is it flowing through. Um, Environmental engineering. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's linked with civil, sometimes it's separate. And then I focus on structures. So any physical structure, so anything the ground up. So I look at buildings, bridges, and then there's geotechnical engineers. This is all within civil. It's
Yeah.
kind of broad, which is
Yeah.
the ground down. So looking at
Mhm.
you know our structures need to be supported by something, and usually that's the ground, that's the soil. And so looking at different soils, how the soils might react to like an earthquake, to a tsunami, and different things like that. Yeah.
Cool. My dad is a civil engineer.
Okay.
He got his master's at Kansas State, and later in the career, he became a dam specialist. So I was always really
Yeah.
excited that I could go around and tell people, "Hey, my dad's a dam engineer."
Dams are cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So So when you were saying that when you thought about going into orthopedics, people said, huh, girls don't really do that. And when you decided on engineering, you really didn't encounter that quite as much. Um, what what percentage female do you think it is for your particular subspecialty?
Yeah. Yeah. So civil engineering at universities kind of hovers around 14 to 18% women.
Hmm.
Civil engineering in the profession is 11% women. In 1980, it was 10% women. So we're
Mm,
not really moving the dial very much.
right.
Um, yeah. Yeah. I didn't really get, like, I guess, the people I hung out with in college were, like my group was like half women, half men. It never dawned on me that I was this like huge minority. I do remember like sitting in one of my classes, my friends and I, we all sat like at the front of the class, and we were, grabbing lunch somewhere on campus, and someone was like, "Oh, you're in our thermodynamics class," and I was like, "Oh, how do you know?" And he's like, "You're the only woman in the class," and we were like, "Really?" And so the next time we like turned around, and we were like, "Oh my gosh,
Look
we
behind
are."
you.
This is all men. So I think that's when like it started dawning on me that women are like in the vast minority in engineering. And definitely, yeah, it's like as I kind of started working in New York and like went back to grad school, it kind of seeped in a little bit later in life for me,
Hmm.
by kind of like looking around and realizing what was happening, of how I was a minority in engineering.
Do you ever feel like you were looked at differently or held to a different standard once you were out in the working world?
Um, yes. Yeah. So I went to work at a structural engineering company when I was 22.
Hmm.
And I was very fortunate to have really awesome managers who really wanted to take me to project meetings with architect, building owner. It just was really interesting for me to hear about how everything comes together, right? So it really gave me that big picture overview. But um, like building owners don't really want to see like a 22-year-old woman as their structural engineer. They want to see some old guy with a beard,
Hmm.
across the table from them. So
Right.
um, it dawned on me pretty early how young I looked, and that looking young as a woman was more detrimental than looking young as a man.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I would dress just ridiculously professional. I was wearing heels all the time. I like spent a lot of money on my wardrobe, to try to look older. Um, and like I wouldn't tell anyone how old I was. I would, yeah, it was definitely like a strategic effort on my part,
Right.
to try to look really professional, to kind of mask my, that I had no idea what I was doing. It's like there's that, but there's also just like, I mean, a lot of our job as a structural engineer is to be on construction sites. So you're trying to dress really professionally in the office,
Hmm. Hmm.
but you can't wear that on a construction site. You have to
Right.
be,
With
you
your
know,
hard
in
hat on and
you have to be in like, steel-toed boots or jeans or something, right? Like, and
hmm.
it's always annoyed me that I feel like most men can just transition so seamlessly from the office to a construction site.
Hmm.
And someone very early on, one of the older women in the office was like, always have a change of clothes in your desk drawer and be ready to go. And so it's just something that like stuck with me. Yeah, I feel like we have to think more,
Hmm.
about these like superfluous things beyond our
Right.
job.
Right.
rather than just showing up in like whatever,
Mhm.
um, and like just like doing your job, right? You have to be like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's also just, I always kind of joke that like I also got a degree in like psychology or something, that like you kind of have to play these mind games with these older men to kind of, I don't want to say manipulate the situation, but you sort of are. Um,
Well,
and
to kind of get the trust that you need, right?
yeah, get the trust, and also to like show you're not a threat, and to like
Mhm.
feed their ego. And it's like, there's
Right.
so much involved with it that you have to do to like kind of navigate that situation that I feel like
Mhm.
my male colleagues definitely did not have to do.
Right. You have to be able to read somebody to know if the way that you're going to
Mhm.
talk, if that's going to threaten them or
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
a complete backfire.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not everybody has to think of that. And so you mentioned that a lot of these people who are in construction aren't expecting to see somebody or don't really want to see somebody across the table from them that's a young female. I'm sure you're familiar with the studies that have been done where they ask a child to draw a picture of who they imagine a scientist or a
Mhm.
mathematician to be. And it's always like a geeky white man with a pencil
Yeah.
protector and like balding on top. And it's like, how do we create a deep enough change and a broad enough change culturally so that, because I think that's where it starts, and that's where the child who pictures a scientist like that is going to maybe grow up to be that person on the other side of the table from you who has these
Mhm.
perceptions, but that also may be the child who's going to grow up and be like, I don't think, a girl growing up to say, no, I don't think I can pursue this field because it's not what they picture. And so I think it's like such a deep and broad issue.
For
What
sure.
what are your thoughts on how to even start making that change? It's a
Yeah.
big topic, right? It's huge.
I know, really, really diving in.
How do we
Um,
solve this problem?
yeah, so I have three nieces and a nephew, all under the age of 6. And the only toys and books that I buy them are engineering or feminist related.
That's great.
I'm trying to do my part. So I do think that we need to start early. And I think there are like tons of children's books now of like girls like building things and like, building robots and um, being engineers and being a scientist. And I do feel like that um, message like has shifted so much from when I was
Mhm.
a kid,
For
just so
sure.
much.
Right.
And it's super awesome to see that. I think we also need to, you know, show more examples of women,
Mhm.
like real women outside of these like, cartoon storybooks,
Right.
being these scientists and engineers, but doing it in a way that they're being true to themselves. And
Mhm.
so like I teach undergrad seniors, like juniors and seniors, and then I teach grad students. But um, the undergrads in particular are always asking me, what do I wear to work? What do I wear to work as an engineer? And do I have to
Mhm.
dress like a man? And I'm like,
Mhm.
no. Like, it's like I love like big jewelry, right? Like it's like I need to be myself, and you should have your own style and flair, like within reason, obviously, like within any workplace. But
Mhm.
um, I think the like girly engineer, like the one that isn't, just dressing like a man in khakis and a polo, um, is I feel like we still need to do a little bit more work on that.
Mhm.
And I think that that's kind of where we still see like some issues, is that you either can be girly or you can be a scientist and you can be an engineer, but like the two don't really clash. And
Right.
it's like that, like it like makes me so sad, as I am not the girliest of girls, but like I enjoy like a good dress and skirt, and like I love wearing my big jewelry. And it's I think that there's cultures that are shifting, and I've definitely seen like a stark difference between when I worked on the East Coast and now I'm on the West Coast. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that's like a difference of 5 years or if that's a difference of location, but there is like a bit of a difference, and I think that hopefully kind of it like spreads throughout the country. We can provide more like awesome examples of like feminine scientists and engineers. um,
Right. I think that, I think we need to, as women in these fields, need to be able to reconcile that we can keep our individuality and we can keep our traits, and like our traits may run on a spectrum from feminine to masculine, even
right.
though we identify as female, um, and that it doesn't detract from your ability to do your job and
Mhm.
to be good at it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like how you look has no bearing on your intelligence. It's just I hate that, right? And it's like I was I do a lot of like post disaster work, so I'm in the field really quickly after a major disaster, and I was in the field on this team, and the lead was a woman. I was like, oh,
You're
yes,
like,
like
yes.
this is awesome, like it was so awesome to work with her. She's just so smart and just wonderful. And she was like, don't ever volunteer to be the secretary. But it's like I think that a lot of women, even in these fields that are increasing in numbers, are still kind of pigeonholed into the same
Mhm.
areas,
Mhm.
especially in like group dynamics.
Right.
And I think things are changing. It's not very quick, but things are definitely shifting. And I think our generation that's in college right now is 100% noticing like around them, how many women are there. And I think that's why it's even more important to have these examples, because they are like more affected by not seeing themselves, um,
Right.
up in front of the classroom or in the field,
Mhm.
or in a certain job that they want. And they're kind of more sensitive to that.
Right. Have you ever had a time in once you got out of your degree programs and you were out in the workforce where you either said, "All right, yes, I have made it," or conversely said, "Oh shit, what am I doing here?" Who the hell am I to be, X, Y, and Z, kind of the whole imposter syndrome thing.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I have like constant imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm just like constantly trying to keep up. Um, it's I mean, I think women are less likely to ask for help and to ask
Mhm.
questions. And something I talked about with my department recently is the importance of making sure that we have regular meetings of faculty, and making sure you have these like regular check-ins with mentors and things like that. And I'm like, because they basically, the College of Engineering at Oregon State just hired a ton of women, just a
Which
lot
is
of
great.
women, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. But it's like you need to be able to change the dynamic to
Mhm.
fit those personalities and to
Right.
fit the way that women kind of function. And so if you're not having these regular check-ins, you're not having these regular meetings, like I sit here and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm like struggling with this. I'm so dumb. Like, how can I not figure this out? Um, and then it's like I struggle with it for like weeks. And then I finally like say something like over a beer to a colleague, and they're like, oh yeah, you should just ask something. Like everyone's confused about that. And I'm like, great,
Right, right.
but you
I
don't know. Like it's like we do have such imposter syndrome. I think we're, especially in fields where we're like we're underrepresented. Um, we feel like we are like the token. We are like
Mhm.
representing the gender as a whole, and
Your whole
and
gender on your shoulders.
we have to be like ultra on top of things, to show like, oh, you hire another woman because like it worked out with me or something.
Yeah.
Um, So I don't know, I just think there is a lot of imposter syndrome, I think particularly amongst women.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. I struggle with it at like every step of the way. Um,
And and I mentioned them kind of in the same breath where you're like, "Yes, I've made it," and then also having the imposter syndrome because I feel like sometimes that happens, that both of those statements or feelings might happen almost in the same breath, right? You think like, "Yes, this is where I wanna be. This is I love this," and then that kind of voice of doubt comes out and it's like, "Wait a minute, should you really be here?" And so I know that happens to me all the time, and it's the more and more people I talk to, it seems like it's really common, and not just among women, and I think this happens among men too, but I feel like we tend to be a little bit more prone to it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I worked in industry after grad school, and so when I finally went into academia, I was the first term. I was like, "This is awesome. This is a really cool job." But it was definitely a lot of me, like I have no idea what I'm doing.
And it's okay to feel like that sometimes. It
I
means you're
know it is.
pushing yourself, right?
I know. It is nice though to like say out loud once in a while in
Yeah.
like a meeting and like see people's reactions. Because like most people, at least like in academia, most people's like, yeah, none of us know.
So what led to your pivot from industry into academia? What made you decide to go to Oregon State?
Yeah, I mean, so I worked in industry before grad school. I applied to grad school during the Great Recession. It was like everyone in New York is getting laid off left and right. Maybe now is a good time to go to grad school. So apparently everyone else on the planet had the same mentality. So I applied to a few programs with the intent of just getting my master's degree.
Hmm.
And then when I got there, I started doing research. I really liked the research. I also just felt like, the 2 years of my master's went by like super quick. But my intention was always to go back into industry. So I like stayed on to get my PhD, but I was like, I don't want to go into academia. I didn't really, I wanted to like work collaboratively with other people. I loved like the feeling of working in industry and like working with the architects and the mechanical engineers and the contractors. And then you go to site and you get to work with the construction workers. And it was just like this really cool environment that you were learning on every project. And I loved like my jobs in New York. So it was great. So I went into industry after my PhD. But I think I kind of like changed a bit while I was at Purdue getting my PhD. And I missed the research. I missed kind of being on like the front lines of things, like beyond industry, right? Like working in things that like building codes hadn't adopted yet, working like
Hmm.
outside the confines of the building codes, like doing investigations. And um, so I applied to academic jobs, and it just, yeah, I got I got a job at Oregon State. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. And let's see. Okay, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your current research projects. I know it's on your website, but I would love it if you would share some of that with the listeners.
Sure. So I do a lot of disaster research. Um, I got my like fundamental background is on the behavior of steel structures and fire.
Mhm.
Basically, the topic came out of what happened in 9/11.
Mhm.
So I continue doing research on that topic. I've also I also do research on the behavior of timber structures in fire, mass timber construction. So like high-rise timber construction is a really big deal in Oregon, since
Mhm.
we have a lot of forested land. So it supports our local economy. Um, and I also look at the behavior of steel and timber structures in earthquakes. And then kind of wrapping it all up, I also look at behavior of communities in wildfires.
Mhm.
So a lot of my research um, and really it kind of stemmed from my undergrad education. I really kind of like focus on the human side. So I do all the structural engineering and look at some, kind of computational analyses. I do large scale testing, build like full scale portions of buildings and then burn them down or break them. But also kind of
Is that
think
a fun
about,
part?
oh, it's
When
super fun.
you're like, all right, so we built these buildings, now we're going to destroy them with fire
I
and
know.
brimstone.
Yeah, it's like the 4-year-old in me is totally coming out. Yeah. I mean, I think it's also just like important for engineers to be thinking about how humans are using their communities
Hmm.
and their buildings, and kind of pulling in some sustainability aspects, but also looking at, um, like we're designing a building, but someone's going to be living in that building or working in that building, or going to the hospital and getting their healthcare in that building. And so how do we design that building so that it meets those functions?
Right.
And also kind of contributes to like the community in a disaster. And so, kind of all of that, and like what I'm doing more recently is looking at like interdependencies between all of these kind of institutions within a community. So
Hmm.
it's, your schools and your housing and your hospitals are all kind of connected to one another. And after a disaster, as the community tries to recover, all of them kind of have to play a different role in order for the community to kind of get back to quote unquote normalcy.
Right.
And how do they rely on one another, right? If your housing doesn't come back, then who's going to your school, or where's your tax base to support your school? Like I work in Paradise, California. The hospital was heavily damaged in the fire, and so a concern of the community was, are people going to send their kids to a school in a town that doesn't have a hospital, doesn't have an
Hmm.
emergency room? And so there's all these little interdependencies that, as an engineer, I never think about, that I just think are so fascinating, that
Right.
kind of motivate my research to kind of look into, okay, so we got to strengthen up the hospital to make sure that doesn't get destroyed, and then like some other thing pops up and you're like, okay, we got to strengthen up this. And so it's really interesting in that regard.
Yeah, and you obviously, with all your years of education and training, um, are in some ways super specialized, but I love how the work that you're doing right now also takes many steps back and just looks at it from a high level view and how it interacts with the community, which is really cool. I went to a TEDx talk here a couple of years ago in Portland, and of course, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he did a talk on wood structures and
Uh-huh.
actually how they can be more fire resistant and fireproof. And I think for your average layperson, their heads exploding, going, "Wait, what wood?" You know. So can you give me your just kind of your primer, your explanation on how and why that actually could work better in some cases?
Yeah, it's so when we talk about high-rise timber buildings, we're definitely not talking about the construction of your home. So that's like first off,
Yep.
right? So like your home is basically like kindling. So
Right.
so basically like what it's all based off of is that wood chars. And so if you have a fire in your building, that and all of a sudden your wood starts charring, that char is almost a natural fire protectant for like the cooler, unburned kind of core of your members, whether it's column, like a vertical member, or beam, horizontal member. And so it slows down kind of like the transfer of heat through the cross section,
Hmm.
which can then prevent it from charring even further. So that's kind of the like the gist of it. But then in addition to that, when you heat like a steel building, the steel wants to expand, but it can't expand, right? Because you have an
Mm,
entire building there. So
right.
so you have this like restraint, right? So it's like pushing on a spaghetti, right? All of a sudden it
Hmm.
starts like deflecting. And so we don't have that in timber, right? You don't have this massive expansion due to a fire. So you don't have to design for like additional loads due to the fire. You're just designing for that fire itself. What we don't know yet, though, and I'm like gearing up to write some proposals for this, is what happens when that fire decays. So if the firefighters come and they put the fire out, and that heat is still kind of going up through that cross section. So we don't know yet, like, okay, how much does it continue to char even after the fire is gone? And so that's like a huge now area of research, because now it's almost like the fire dynamics is kind of merged with this like structural performance, and you have to see, okay, so if the heat keeps transferring, then all of a sudden you could come back and your building could be totally collapsed, and that could be like really horrible. So
Yeah.
so there's still a lot of research to be done on the fire front of mass timber, but it's super exciting because we never have new materials in structural
Mm-hmm.
engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just like so much to look at and so much to research, and it's a kind of exciting time to be involved with it.
That's very cool. So, was there ever a point throughout either your education or your career where you had a major disappointment or a failure of some type and just things not going the way that you wanted to? And can you tell me about that? And can you tell me how you got yourself to bounce back?
Yeah, how much time do we have? Yeah, it's yeah. I think, I mean, I definitely had some failures throughout my career. I applied to a number of different grad schools. When I applied to grad school, I didn't get into most of them. And I was like super depressed. I thought like I was a total failure, but I got into, one, I got funded in one of them. And I think that, it's like we have to, think about the opportunities that we do have, and even if that's like, nothing, right? Like I mean, most people go on the academic job market multiple times.
Hmm.
So I applied to academic jobs my first year out of grad school, and I didn't get any jobs. And I was, it was such a blow, that, I couldn't get an academic job, right? Um, but it's, I had to think to myself, like, okay, well, I went through this process. I can now like try again. I have to like build up. I do have a job. It's not like I'm unemployed. I have a great job. And, just like keep going, right?
Hmm.
I think that learning to fail is really important. Um, and I think my undergrad did like a really great job at teaching us that. It's like all of our exams were just insanely hard, and the average was like
Uh-huh.
40.
Oh,
And it
wow.
just, yeah, it was ridiculous. Like people have like test anxiety coming out of that. But I think that was, I mean, basically every education literature says don't do that. But I mean, one thing that came out that was like really great is that I learned to fail. Like I was okay, not doing okay, and then picking myself up and trying again and
Hmm.
learning, okay, what did I do wrong? What was maybe not the greatest? Who can I reach out around me to help?
Hmm.
Um, Making sure you have like a community, is so important. And it's like pretty much like I feel like that's like the underlying theme of like being a woman in male dominated industries, like having
Yeah.
your like group of women, and your community and people that you can turn to for help,
Hmm.
and being okay asking for that help. That's it's the only way you're going to do it, and everyone does it. Absolutely no one gets anywhere by themselves. And I just think like if someone's saying that they're probably not crediting the people around them.
Right. And you totally just answered the question that I like to ask everybody, and that is, if you have that one piece of advice for women who want to go into a field like yours, what would it be? Would you agree that that's what you would say?
Yeah, you have to have a community. You have to have I don't know if we're like allowed to curse on this thing.
Hey,
but
have at it.
but it's so I mean I went to like I got this award at in Portland and like basically they were like you got to have your team of badass bitches that you can
I
turn
love
to.
it.
And I loved that, and I felt
That's
like I had
awesome.
so many people I could just like text and be like, "You're my team of badass bitches," um, and it's I just think it's so important. And it's I've been I like started a women in civil and construction engineering group here at Oregon State
Did you
3 years
call
ago.
it Badass Bitches?
No, I wasn't allowed to, but I would love to. That would be so awesome.
The subtitle. That's the subtitle.
Yeah, all right, all right. Yeah, and it's I started like reading a lot of literature on like retention of underrepresented minorities, specifically in STEM fields. And like across the board, it's like you got to have a community.
Right,
And people who feel like they have a community who support them um, are more likely to stay. Like
right.
that and like mentors. But I think it's like I mean, honestly, it was like the only reason that I formed this group is I felt like all these women were coming to me with their problems, and I was like, you need a team of badass bitches,
Yeah,
and you have
yeah.
to like meet other women in engineering so that you can form that.
Right. We can't be made to feel like we're on an island, and I think it's important for women to not only take it upon themselves to form that community, but also for leadership to recognize that that's
Hmm.
important, whether
For
that's coming
sure.
from a man or a woman in that leadership position. But I
Yeah.
think that making sure that that happens is key. I agree with you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's like your community doesn't have to be like solely women, but you can't feel like you're the only woman, in in your field, and I think there's at least in engineering and specifically in civil, there's so many like women's groups that are kind of just these grassroots efforts popping up all over the country to just build a community in these cities, and just it's it's so important that you have that. I mean, it's important that you have a community in general, but I think you need to see people who look like you
Yeah,
and kind of have a like mindset.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
it's been amazing talking to you, and I learned so much today, which was great. If our listeners want to keep up with what you're doing and find you online, where can they do that?
They can find me through the Oregon State University website. If you just Google my name, Oregon State University, it pops up. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank you so
so much
much.
again.
Yeah, this was super fun.
Thank you. All right. We're done.
Yeah,
Yay.
that was
Thanks.
fun.
Good. I'm glad. And I definitely did learn a lot. I got to ask my questions about the wood, and because I was thinking about that. And I don't know if if you at all know. I think it was probably 3 years ago. Was a
Was
builder.
it Reed
Um,
Zimmerman or Eric
yeah,
McDonald? Reed?
I think it was Reed.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, I know
yeah.
him really well. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
As you were saying it, I was like, I probably know who that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
Well,
consults on like all my research.
oh, cool.
So we
Yeah.
like I have a lot of I mean, I love working with structural engineers in industry, and so I just like pull in these industry professionals on my research, and
Yeah.
they love it because they get to work with the students and like
Mhm.
pretend like they're still in grad school, like, break
Yeah, I'm
things
sure
and
they do. How
yeah,
fun. Well, this is awesome. So, I'll send the episode off for editing. I'll let you know when the podcast is going to launch, and
Yeah,
and I always ask all the different women that I interview if you can think of anyone else to refer my way that is kind of a woman pioneer, or just whether it's engineering or not, or anyone you might know in your personal circles that might be a good guest. I am open to all of that. I would really appreciate it.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I work with a ton of women in structural engineering. Like, there's like tons of networks, and
Yeah.
so
Cool. And I'll let you know when when it launches, and also when your episode will come out, and I'll just keep
great.
you posted. And if you'll share and review and like, then that kind of helps my podcast get off the ground
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. So none of the episodes are out yet.
No, I'm
Okay.
hoping for May,
Okay.
end of May. So like the logistics of it is that they have to finish editing the episodes, and then the first one has to go through Apple and get assigned an RSS, and like that can take anywhere from like days to weeks. So that's the the uncertain part, and I'm learning all about it as I go because I've obviously never podcasted before. But I think that's the bottleneck. I
Yeah.
have my, it's like I have all my graphics and my art
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
of that, and then I'll
Yeah.
just rely heavily on social media and my
Hmm.
interviewees, my guests, to
Hmm.
help me spread the word too. So,
Yeah. So there's this
yeah.
podcast that actually, I don't think it's going to continue. Um,
Oh.
and it's called Battle Tactics for My Sexist Work Environment.
Oh, cool. That sounds great.
um,
I think I'm gonna
yeah,
have to look that one up.
I know, right? It's pretty good. Some of what they say, I'm like, oh, that's not like super applicable to me. But they had my favorite episode was how to be an ally, and I know like
Yeah.
you had that like line there.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just super awesome. Because I know like I'm always talking about how like diversity and inclusion can't just be like a woman's thing or
Right.
people of color or like LGBT people.
Exactly.
Like it needs to be like everyone, like I need to be an advocate for people of color,
Yeah.
like someone else needs to be an advocate for women. And like, it's like if I had to wait around for like a female mentor, like I'd still be waiting, right? Like,
Yeah.
like I've had just like awesome men give me awesome advice and mentor me in really great ways.
Yep.
And it was just like a really awesome episode, and I like recommend it to
Oh,
all
I'm gonna have
my
to
like
find that.
female
Yeah.
grad students and stuff like
The
that.
the title of it was, I remembered Sexist and Battleground. What was what was the rest of the title?
Battle Tactics for My
Oh,
Sexist Work Environment.
tactics
It's
for
really great.
my so who's the host? What does she do?
Um, they're just like authors. I mean, they're
Oh,
not,
okay.
yeah,
They're like
but
different
they're,
authors for each episode.
no, it's same two women.
Oh, okay.
They host all of them.
Oh,
But
cool.
they're really great. But yeah, like I mean, I was referred to it because I like literally the most asked question I get is, what do you wear? What should we wear to work?
Yeah.
As an engineer. And there was an episode on what to wear to work. And so I was listening to it, and it was like not very good. So I was like, damn it, this could have been a resource. But then I just started kind of like listening to some others.
Hmm.
And I really loved the like how to be a good ally. I just
Yeah.
thought it was like a really like well thought out, and it mainly focuses on like women to women, but I think like
Hmm.
um it made me start thinking about just like kind of like being broader, and that you
Right.
can't just like be like a passive person, like to take
Hmm.
action and like provide opportunities, and like
Hmm.
to, if you see a seminar or you see like a talk, to like forward it to people and be like, you should go to this, or you should get involved in this
Right.
organization, you should get involved in this committee, or you should connect to this person, let me introduce you, or like those like actions mean so much. And it's so true, because like we see it ourselves, right, when other people do it for us.
Right.
It's really like, you're like, oh, little me, like you thought of me.
Yeah. It really
You
means a
know,
lot. It means a lot.
it means a lot. So, yeah, I thought it was like
Oh,
just an
cool.
awesome, yeah,
I'll check that out for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Well, thanks again, and thanks for
yeah.
taking the time out of your afternoon, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good luck on the rest of your interviews.
Thank you so much.